that time again. Another World Championship. And after being present at the last World Championship between Carlsen and Karyakin, I must say, so far, I'm so much happier with the openings and the style of play. Like, every game was a Spanish torture, and a lot of people were expecting the same thing here. Like, those openings are just so dry to me. I can't stand them personally. So it was a nice and pleasant change of pace to see in game one a Sicilian. And that's not typically in Carlsen's repertoire. I mean, it's a rare guest, we could definitely say. And then knight c6. And when you're looking at Caruana's repertoire, he doesn't typically play d4 here. He's one of those guys that plays the Rossalimo, and I mean, honestly, when looking at the games of another Floridian, Julio Becerra, he goes through people like a buzzsaw. So I've felt that personally I avoid these positions with black because it's tantamount to suicide against a player who is really, really good with them. But clearly Carlsen's camp has done their homework as he played this in both game one and game three. At the recording of this video, there's only been 3 games played so far. Takes, d3, all making sense so far. h3 seems normal enough. And after knight d7, this was the improvement over a previous, like, many games. Whereas black has the idea at some point to have the flexibility, since you haven't castled, to be able to play knight f8 to e6. So this is really where the game's starting to begin. And there was a game between Caruana and Gelfin that went castles, and after e5, you get some really good play here for all the mess. And after rook takes e5, rook g5, and the game was already called 1-0. So another idea, Magnus in the position played b6 instead of knight d7 in a previous game. And this is pretty typical with these structures. And both sides got some interesting play. And Magnus went on to actually win this game. And this was against Caruana himself in 2015. So going back to the main game after knight d7, we got ourselves bishop e3, e5, and the typical move here for flexibility for white is queen d2. But Caruana clearly had a certain plan in mind with castles, b6, and watching the game live, Caruana started taking a lot of time here. And as I was analyzing the game, I mean, the first move that came to mind for me was a4. And this move has a lot of merits to it, because it's really waiting to see what black is going to do. We don't necessarily want to play a5, but we're looking at ideas like playing knight d2 to c4. And then we're chilling, we're seeing what's going to happen. And at any point in time, if black decides to move this knight, so say knight f8 immediately, like the plan, then we go a5, and it's really softened up the c-pawn. So I liked a4 as a move. I definitely think it should be consideration here based off the way that white was playing. So knight h2 was played in the game. And black's continuing with his plan. And if you don't play it now, you'll never get to play it. f4. So takes, and now bishop e6. And another commentator noted that this was the first seriously notable moment of the game. And I believe this was Shanklin's comment. I was very surprised black would not want to put the knight on e6, but Carlsen had other ideas. His plan will be to play h6, g5, and then knight g6. Then depending upon how white plays, he'll castle on the side that he feels is best. Around here, I joined the live broadcast that said I would prefer the black side of the position, though white is objectively not worse yet. So that's by the United States champion. And I mean, it's easy to agree with his assessment, but it's funny that how quickly this position just kind of got out of hand for white, just a smidge, and then that's all it takes at this level. So rook f2, logical, starting the plan of that kingside expansion, keeping an eye pressuring the h6 pawn, and g5. It's just preparing to get that knight out, like the aforementioned plan. Rook a f1, and here was about the time that I started feeling definitely uncomfortable with white, because all of your pieces are relatively good except for the knight on h2, and there's no real definitive way of what you're going to be doing. Like, I think probably better is the idea of keeping the square open for the knight. So we have the idea to drop into these squares since Carlsen has created this weakness. This immediately with rook a f1 doesn't feel right, and after knight f1 it just seems the better way to go. But rook a f1, queen d6, and now this is consistent with the previous play, but this is about the time that the computer starts hating the white position. Castles, knight f6, go away, and it's everything's just going well for Magnus in this position here. According to the comment, also by Shanklin, round here he really thought that Magnus would win the first game. White is horribly passive and will face serious pressure on the king side. Can't disagree. g4. You got to stop g4 yourself. Yeah, locks it down. Now maybe you have some dreams of making things happen. b3, knight d1. Now, at least white has a pawn for the upcoming suffering. Knight e6, knight h5. And I like this decision to ruin up the pawn structure to get in knight f4. And it's interesting because it was recommended by the engine to play rook takes f4 here. And white exchanged off the annoying dark square bishop and has two solid pawns for the exchange. I mean, the miserable knight will eventually be able to come to f5 via e3. And like the computer says that this is like zeros, but I don't know many people that, let's say, in this position would prefer to play the white side, because I mean there's just objectively too many things that can go wrong. If the rooks come off the board, I don't see this being very easy to hold. The engine in its infinite wisdom definitely disagrees. So rook g2, and we're getting to the point of the game where it is Carlsen's to win here. Black just simply wants to play rook g8 here, so we got to plug the hole, and now white's definitely teetering on losing. Like, if he could save the h5 pawn, he'd probably be better, but once the h pawn is gone, the idea is going to be just to get the queen out of the way and then play h5 yourself. And this is just painful. So queen f3, grab, and now you got to run, otherwise you're going to be in trouble. Bishop c7, and now king e2. When I was watching the broadcast, I remember this is the time where the engine was like, no, you're done. You're done, son. It's like almost a point and a half in Black's favor at this point. The engine was recommending e5, and with this type of play. And this was supposed to offer decent drawing chances. This more than likely will hold, because long-term endgame plans, I'm just going to get my rook behind the pawn. I'm going to dance my king over to b2 after a number of checks. And if we get that situation, let's say rook f7, and I'll just play a few moves for for clarity, just to show how white will zigzag if black keeps checking. And then, you know, I'm just going to waste moves here to get to this position to explain that even if we get to this point, it's going to be very, very difficult for black to get the king all the way down here to defend the pawn, because we can check. And that's why a lot of the time in these positions, a lot of the times rather, you'll keep this pawn one square open so the king can run down here and we have more winning chances. But also with the pawn here, you are sacrificing pawns and giving white counterplay by doing this run over here plan. So objectively, more than likely going to be a draw. So running back to the main game after king e2, queen g5, and now h5 is coming and breaking the position apart. Knight h2, and you feel the pain. Rook f2. Up this point, Magnus is playing, you know, a very, very clean game. He took a slightly worse position with the double pawns and gradually just made something out of nothing like he seems to do. And this was the point in the game where it was his to win and he goes drifting. So if it's your move here and you're playing black, this is where you pause the video and take your time to try to figure out what you would do. All right, I'll give you the second to pause, and okay, we're back. Now, the best plan, according to the engine, is to drop the lady back with the idea of imposing into the position and attacking pawn weaknesses. You also, as soon as the queen moves, has the idea of rook g3, and this is a highly uncomfortable position. Pretty straightforward. But right here, Carlsen decided on queen g1. And this makes the win a lot more difficult. So after knight f1, the next few moves it should be noted that this is move 36. They get extra time at move 40, so both men were in time trouble here. h4, but again, the idea queen g7 with the same idea was still strong. But when you're committed to the plan, you're going to stick to it. And clearly Carlsen didn't consider that. King d2, again, this idea with e5 sacking the pawn should be considered in order to get, you know, your knight to a well-posted square. So king d2, and activity is worth more than the material, 100%. c3. Now, it's so hard. And now the move that Magnus needed to play the past couple moves, queen g7, is what he played, and it's no longer the best move anymore. Probably the best move's probably b5. And after queen e2, you have b4. And this is going to be really, really good. So, queen g7. And now at least the knight's getting to this wonderful g4 square. So grab. We get the most dangerous piece off the board. Holding on. So now at least you have some counterplay with this e-pawn running. And we're going through the rest of this game quickly because all the moves are relatively straightforward. And I wanted to go through a little bit of this ending just to get to this point. And here is where, when you're watching the commentary, they're like, oh, this position's just dead equal. It's a draw. Like, why are they still playing? One, it shows that when either man, especially Carlsen in this case, has the advantage, even though he objectively knows the evaluation, he's going to play on. And this should be the philosophy of any chess player, that if you feel ever that you cannot lose the position, you should always play on. Like, that is the rule in my mind. And I've won positions like this on a regular basis where it's dead drawn and I kept playing. I had a game in amateur team in the first round 3 years ago where I defeated a player that was only 200 points lower rated, an expert player, and it was rook and 4 versus rook and 4. All 4 pawns were on the king side and both sides. No deficiencies, no double pawns, and I won that game after 2 hours of working with the position. So we'll quickly go through the rest of these moves, and of course at this level it's trivial to play on, but it's 1, psychology, and 2, I have no risk of losing. So I'm going to play here to see if you get complacent with your defense and just mess around in the position until finally he decides to make some changes. Notice, no 50 move rule, just testing, just teasing. Nothing much to do. And then finally, get somewhere. Makes a little change. And of course, if the B pawn would fall, this would be a win for black, but white has optimal defense. That's the end of game 1 at 115 moves. And I hope this sets the tone for the match overall, because I'm personally still expecting, as the games go on, to see Magnus swap to his bread and butter with the typical e4, e5 stuff, and we have more snooze fest games like we're seeing in the Carlsen-Karjakin match. And I'm not going to comment on them. I'm just going to hit the arrow key. All right, so hopefully you enjoyed the first video. Check out the next ones because we're going to knock them out.